Welcome to the Human Archive. If you enjoy original science fiction stories about humanity finding its place among the stars, subscribe and join us for the next one. Now, let's begin. Chapter 1. The Final Execution. Strategos of Ixalda knew what victory looked like from the losing side. It looked quiet. The silence was what surprised him most. For 6 years, Tirassa's sky had been crowded with alarms, interceptor traffic, orbital fire, emergency broadcasts, and the permanent low thunder of military industry. The war had turned the air above the capital into another layer of machinery. Now almost everything had stopped. The orbital defense lattice was dark. The home fleet had transmitted surrender codes 7 hours earlier. 3 surviving planetary batteries remained functional, but Uvik had personally ordered their crews to power them down. Anything else would have been murder performed for the sake of pride. Uvik had not become humane because he lost. He had always believed that command existed to prevent pride from spending lives without purpose. That belief had made him effective for the Dominion and occasionally unpopular inside it. During the final year of the war, he had overruled 2 ceremonial counterattacks that would have accomplished nothing except adding names to memorial walls. He had still prosecuted a brutal war. He did not confuse professionalism with innocence. He stood in the shattered command gallery beneath the capital's central defense citadel and watched the human fleet enter low orbit. There were enough ships to end the argument permanently. The formation included human battleships, carriers, missile arsenals, assault transports, and logistics vessels larger than some Tirassi stations. Uvik had fought humans long enough to recognize their pattern. They rarely brought only what they needed. They brought enough that a second disaster could begin before the first one ended, and they would still have reserves. That habit had helped win them the war. Tirassi analysts had once mocked the redundancy as waste. Then human fleets kept operating after depots were destroyed, routes were cut, and entire task groups were forced to improvise around missing infrastructure. The same habit that made their offensives hard to starve now filled orbit with hospital capacity, water systems, generators, and construction equipment before Tirassa had finished processing surrender. Now it would probably help them finish it. A young officer stood at Uvik's side. Shelter confirmations are still coming in. How many districts? 81% of the capital population is below hardened cover. The western shelters are overcrowded. Keep them open. Yes, strategos. Uvik looked again at the descending human formations. His people had bombed human colonies. They had shattered settlements on Arden Reach. They had struck shipyards with civilian habitation cylinders still attached. The Dominion had called those targets strategically necessary. Humanity had called them something else. Uvik had never forgotten the intercepted footage from one human city after a Tirassi strike. The footage showed buildings burning, civilians carrying wounded strangers, and a human reporter standing in smoke while reading names. He had understood then that the war had changed. The humans had stopped fighting only for territory. Now they were fighting for memory. The first human ships began atmospheric descent. Uvik's officer swallowed. Medical markings. Uvik looked at him. What? The tactical display enlarged the descending craft. The first descending ships carried white hull panels and emergency medical glyphs recognized across most civilized space. They were hospital carriers. Uvik assumed deception. Then the second formation entered atmospheric processors. The third carried modular water treatment systems. The fourth consisted of construction barges. There were no bombardment platforms and no execution fleet. Uvik stared. One of the human hospital ships opened a planetary channel. The translated voice was calm. Civilian emergency channels are now active. Priority will be assigned by medical need, not citizenship, rank, or military status. Local hospitals may submit capacity requests immediately. Nobody in the command gallery spoke. Uvik's first thought was that it had to be propaganda. His second was that propaganda did not require 6 hospital carriers. A human engineering ship entered orbit above the damaged equatorial magnetosphere station. Another began deploying power modules toward the eastern continent. Uvik stepped closer to the display. What are they doing? His officer looked equally lost. Strategos, I believe they are repairing us. Uvik almost struck him for saying it. Instead he said no. Then a fresh transmission arrived. Operation Second Dawn, Planetary Stabilization Phase 1 commencing. Uvik read the words twice. Humanity had conquered Tirassa. The galaxy had expected an execution. The humans had brought a construction schedule. Chapter 2. The Surrender Table. Admiral Penelope Ashcroft looked less impressive in person than Uvik expected. That annoyed him. She was not particularly large. Her uniform was severe but undecorated beyond what rank required. There was gray in her dark hair. Her expression suggested fatigue rather than triumph. Uvik had seen her face throughout the final campaign. Human military broadcasts, prisoner exchanges, ceasefire negotiations. She had broken the Dominion's outer fleets, cut 3 supply corridors, and forced the surrender of Tirassa without attempting the mass bombardment his government had predicted. He had expected someone theatrical. Instead, she looked like an exhausted administrator. That impression was closer to the truth than Uvik knew. Ashcroft had spent the final campaign treating logistics as strategy, ending battles quickly, keeping surrender corridors open, and refusing attacks that would leave the coalition responsible for millions of civilians without functioning infrastructure afterward. She had not merely planned how to defeat Tirassa. She had planned what would still need to work the morning after. The surrender chamber had once hosted Imperial naval planning sessions. Now half the ceiling was covered in temporary reinforcement. Human officers stood along one wall, Tirassi representatives along the other. The treaty terms appeared between them. Uvik read carefully. Disarmament of Dominion strategic forces, fleet limitations, inspection rights, war crimes investigations, border guarantees, dissolution of several military institutions, reparations tied to future economic recovery rather than immediate seizure. The document also required transparent procurement, joint auditing, demobilization milestones, and local civilian participation in reconstruction boards. Human aid was not a blank transfer of wealth. It came attached to rules designed to keep rebuilding money from becoming the next Dominion treasury or disappearing into the same military institutions the treaty was dismantling. The surrender terms were harsh and humiliating, but rational. Then came the section he did not understand. Emergency ecological stabilization assistance to be financed primarily by the Terran Coalition and Allied reconstruction authorities. Uvik read it again. Who owns the restored infrastructure? Ashcroft answered, Tirassa. He narrowed his eyes. What territory does humanity claim? None. Resource concessions? None. Permanent occupation rights? Treaty monitoring only. Limited bases under joint agreement. Uvik looked toward the human legal advisors. They did not appear amused. That made him more suspicious. Then what is the mechanism? Ashcroft frowned slightly. What mechanism? Repayment. There isn't one. Uvik felt heat rise under his collar. You are committing trillions in industrial output to a defeated enemy. Yes. You are restoring systems your own forces damaged. Some of them. Systems our forces also damaged. Yes. You are feeding populations whose government attacked you. Yes. You are treating soldiers who killed your citizens. Ashcroft's expression hardened. Some of them will face trial. That is not an answer. It is exactly the answer. Uvik leaned forward. What do you expect in repayment? Ashcroft looked at him. Nothing. He waited. She moved to the next clause. Uvik almost laughed, not because it was funny, because the alternative was believing her. No empire gives away that much leverage. We're not an empire. You want. That doesn't make us one. You hold my world. For the moment, you could take anything. Ashcroft's eyes cooled. Yes. The room became quiet. Uvik understood the warning. Human mercy existed because human force made refusal unnecessary. That was important. This was not weakness. It was restraint. He hated it more. A conqueror taking territory could be hated cleanly. A conqueror rebuilding hospitals created complications. Uvik signed the surrender. Then he waited for the hidden price to reveal itself. It did not. Chapter 3. Trust your own numbers. Human reconstruction teams moved faster than Tirassi bureaucracy. That was not a compliment. It was terrifying. Within 72 hours, mobile medical units operated in 14 major cities. Human engineers had restored emergency power to 2 atmospheric regulation hubs. Cargo ships brought grain concentrates, protein cultures, industrial filters, and portable reactor systems. Tirassi ministries protested. Some claimed the aid was contaminated. Others argued the humans were installing surveillance systems. One provincial governor threatened to block access to a damaged coastal power network. Uvik sympathized with all of them. Then Dr. Linnea Caraway arrived. She had no interest in sympathy. Her first meeting with Uvik lasted 13 minutes before she accused 3 Tirassi ministries of hiding data from one another. "They aren't hiding it," Uvik said. "Then they're incompetent." His jaw tightened. Linnea looked at him. "Which would you prefer?" She displayed the planet. The projections were worse than the military ones. Crop yields in the northern agricultural belts were collapsing. Several water treatment systems were operating on temporary wartime bypasses. The magnetospheric network had enough surviving capacity for emergency protection, but not long-term stability. 2 ocean circulation control nodes had failed entirely. Atmospheric loss was not immediate, but upper atmosphere degradation would accelerate if the orbital field network remained damaged. "This model is exaggerated," Uvik said. Linnea folded her arms. "You don't have to trust us." "I do not." "Good." She changed displays. "These aren't our numbers." Uvik stared. Tirassi engineering models, pre-war infrastructure assessments, military maintenance reports, civilian ecological projections. Linnea had combined them. "Trust your own numbers," she said. That answer hurt more than a human accusation would have. Uvik called 3 Tirassi systems directors, then 4. They confirmed the projections. One of them began apologizing. Uvik cut him off. "Do we have the capacity to stabilize this without human assistance?" Silence. The answer arrived anyway. Number Linnea watched him. "We're not rebuilding your planet for you," she said. "We're rebuilding it with you." Uvik looked toward the planetary model. "I have spent 6 years trying to stop you. And now I am apparently expected to help you repair what we both broke." "Yes." "You find no irony in this." "I work in planetary systems, strategos. Irony isn't load-bearing." He disliked her immediately. The friction became useful. Chapter 4. Enemy Hospital. Uvik's first visit to a human field hospital was supposed to be administrative. He planned to inspect security procedures. Instead, he found a wounded Tirassi pilot crying. The pilot had lost one leg during the final orbital battle. Human surgeons had stabilized him after his escape capsule landed outside a controlled zone. He had been transferred to a medical carrier with hundreds of civilian patients. Uvik recognized the reason for his fear when the surgeon entered. The human wore a narrow black band around one wrist. Arden Reach. Uvik knew the human memorial custom. The Tirassi bombardment of Arden Reach had killed more than 80,000 civilians. The pilot saw the band too. His breathing changed. The surgeon looked at him. "Are you in pain?" The pilot stared. "No." "Any prior reaction to anesthetic medication?" The pilot said nothing. The surgeon waited. Uvik understood what the pilot expected: punishment. The surgeon repeated the question. "Any previous surgical complications?" Finally, the pilot answered, "No." "Good." The surgeon began reviewing the procedure. There was no accusation, speech, or revenge. The surgeon was not warm. Her answers were clipped, her expression tired, and the black memorial band never left Uvik's attention. What mattered was that none of those feelings altered the anesthesia dose, the infection precautions, or the surgical plan. Humanity had built institutions specifically so that a physician did not need to forgive a patient before treating one. Afterward, Uvik found Ashcroft in a temporary operations room. "Why are you treating military personnel?" She looked up. "The war is over. Some of those soldiers bombed your cities. Then investigate them. You separate treatment from guilt." "Yes." Uvik stared. "That is absurd." Ashcroft returned to her report. "Probably. You say that as if it does not matter." "The war is over." The same answer, nothing more. Uvik left angry. 2 weeks later, the pilot survived reconstructive surgery. 3 months later, he testified before a war crimes tribunal against one of his former commanders. Uvik did not know what to do with that. Chapter 5. The Price. Humanity argued with itself in public. Uvik found that almost as strange as the reconstruction. Tirassi politics had always treated external unity as strength. Internal disagreement belonged behind closed doors. Human broadcasts did the opposite. Families of the war dead demanded that reconstruction funding be cut, while veterans asked why Tirassi cities received new power systems when some human colonies were still rebuilding. Economists warned that Operation Second Dawn could become the largest non-military expenditure in coalition history. Several allied governments threatened to reduce participation. Uvik watched Admiral Ashcroft testify before the Terran Assembly through a public channel. A legislator leaned toward her. "Admiral, the Tirassi attacked us." "Yes." "They killed civilians." "Yes." "They destroyed colonies." "Yes." "And now you are asking those same families to finance Tirassa's recovery." Ashcroft's face did not move. "I am asking the Assembly to finance regional stability." The legislator's voice sharpened. "Why should we care what happens to the population of a nation that tried to conquer us?" Ashcroft paused, "Because we'll still live next to whoever survives." The chamber quieted. She continued. "A collapsed Tirassa means refugees, piracy, radicalization, famine, permanent military containment, and probably another war. We can spend now rebuilding functioning institutions, or spend for the next 100 years managing the wreckage." Another legislator asked, "And gratitude?" Ashcroft's expression hardened. "I don't need them grateful. I need their children alive long enough to disagree with their parents." Uvik stopped the recording. That line offended him. Then he played it again. Humanity was not rebuilding Tirassa because it trusted the Tirassi. It was rebuilding Tirassa because it preferred a living adversary capable of changing over a dead civilization guaranteed to become mythology. The funding passed. The legislation also imposed review dates, spending caps by phase, anti-corruption triggers, and automatic reductions as Tirassi tax revenue recovered. Reconstruction survived politically because its supporters were willing to make it measurable. Humanity did not ask its citizens to fund an undefined act of goodness forever. It built an exit ramp into the policy. Narrowly, Uvik had expected human mercy to collapse when it became expensive. Instead, they voted to keep paying for it while shouting at one another the entire time. Chapter 6. The First Winter. Tirassa's first post-war winter nearly broke them anyway. Agricultural output fell faster than the models predicted. A fungal contamination swept through two already weakened food production zones. Power shortages shut down thermal management in several northern cities. Oceanic circulation failures changed coastal weather patterns. The emergency grain reserves were not enough. Humans responded with cargo. The first shipments were not glamorous. Grain, antifungal cultures, transformer windings, replacement pumps, insulation foam, portable heat exchangers, and millions of standardized fasteners arrived before ceremonial reconstruction materials did. Human planners prioritized whatever prevented a second failure from cascading out of the first. Uvik began to understand why their logistics vessels had frightened him almost as much as their battleships. Military transports that had carried missiles during the war arrived carrying food, while troop carriers unloaded portable heating systems. Orbital foundries stopped producing armor components and began printing obsolete Tirassi power couplings because local grids depended on designs humans had never seen before. Linnea Caraway spent 3 days arguing with a Tirassi infrastructure engineer over a cooling manifold. Uvik arrived midway through the fight. "You cannot replace that assembly with the human equivalent," the engineer said. Linnea looked exhausted. "I know. You keep sending the wrong part. Because your archival specification is wrong." "It is not wrong." "Then why doesn't the part fit?" The engineer froze. Uvik almost smiled. 2 hours later, they discovered that the network had been modified 70 years earlier, but the official plans had never been updated. Humans manufactured the corrected component. Tirassi technicians installed it. The district stayed powered. That became the pattern. Humans brought scale. Tirassi brought local knowledge. Neither could move fast enough alone. Human fabrication capacity could produce almost anything once engineers knew what the real requirement was. Tirassi technicians knew which old systems had been modified, which official plans were fiction, and which improvised wartime bypasses would fail if touched in the wrong order. The work accelerated when both sides stopped treating local knowledge and industrial scale as competing forms of expertise. Uvik watched former enemy soldiers unload food at a school shelter. Children gathered near the cargo line. One little Tirassi stared at a human Marine's armor. The Marine removed his helmet. The child asked something too quiet for Uvik to hear. The human laughed, then handed her a ration packet. Uvik turned away. He still hated humans. That mattered to him. Hatred preserved a kind of order, but he could no longer tell himself they were monsters. Monsters did not repair heating systems for the children of defeated enemies. Chapter 7. No Forgiveness. Uvik discovered Penelope Ashcroft had lost a brother at Arden Reach by accident. He found the name in a memorial archive. Captain Jonah Ashcroft, civilian emergency pilot, killed during the second Tirassi strike. Uvik stared at the record for a long time, then he went to see her. She was reviewing magnetosphere reconstruction schedules. You had family at Arden Reach. Penelope looked up. Yes. Your brothers? Yes. Uvik waited. She did not offer more. Did he die during the bombardment? Yes. Uvik felt something unpleasant tighten inside his chest. I authorized reinforcement of the strike corridor. Penelope's face went very still. He continued. I was not responsible for targeting, but the operation passed through my command. I know. You knew. I read your file. Then you know I helped kill him. You helped prosecute the war. Uvik stared. Do you forgive us? No. The answer came immediately. No hesitation, no comforting lie. Uvik had expected mercy to require absolution. Penelope simply returned her attention to the report. He felt almost insulted. Then, why are you doing this? She did not look up, because forgiveness isn't a prerequisite for keeping children alive. Ashcroft left it there. Uvik left. For the first time since surrender, he stopped searching for the hidden mechanism. There might not be one. The absence of a hidden mechanism frightened him more than manipulation would have. Chapter 8. The Unpayable Life. Tirassi culture had a concept humans struggled to translate. A life saved created an obligation. Not ownership, not servitude, reciprocity. A person pulled from a fire owed something to the rescuer. A family saved during disaster carried the obligation collectively. A city preserved during war remembered the act for generations. The principle worked because the scale remained human. One life, one household, one community. Operation Second Dawn broke the arithmetic. Tirassi civilians began leaving gifts outside human hospitals. The gifts included food, handmade objects, family insignia, and letters. One agricultural district renamed a bridge after a human engineering battalion. Parents gave human names to children born during the worst winter. Penelope hated that. Uvik found her staring at a crate of gifts in her office. You appear uncomfortable. I am. Why? Because these people think they owe us something. They do. Penelope looked at him. Uvik explained the concept of life debt. One saved life creates an obligation. I understand gratitude. It is more formal than gratitude. How formal? Historically, debts of life have ended feuds. Penelope's expression changed. Uvik continued. You saved hospitals, agricultural regions, cities, the planetary shielding network. There is no Tirassi category for this. Then invent one. We already have. Despite herself, Penelope looked interested. What is it? The unpayable life. Penelope rubbed her forehead. That sounds unhealthy. Uvik nearly laughed. You do not understand. No, I do. Your people think they owe humanity a debt too large to calculate. Yes. Then don't. Uvik stared. Don't what? Repay it. That is not possible. Why? Because obligation exists whether the creditor demands it or not. Penelope shook her head. We're not creditors. You keep saying that. Because it's true. She pushed the gift crate toward him. Tell them to spend the money on their own families. They will not. Then tell them I said it was an order. Uvik smiled despite himself. That would make it worse. Penelope looked horrified. For the first time, Uvik enjoyed Operation Second Dawn. Chapter 9. The planet breathes. Years passed. The first time Tirassa's magnetosphere network returned to full protective output, the capital stopped for 17 minutes. Every public display carried the field status. Children watched from school windows. Older Tirassi stood in silence. The sky looked exactly the same. The unchanged sky made the moment stranger. For years, the planet had depended on emergency shielding, improvised stations, and human orbital power systems. Now the restored network belonged to Tirassa again. Food production recovered next. followed by water systems and coastal infrastructure. Ocean circulation repair took longer. Some damage could not be reversed quickly. Human engineers argued with Tirassi ecologists for years over whether to rebuild old systems or allow new climate equilibria to form. The final plan did both. Uvik retired from formal military command. He remained under legal restrictions for several years, then entered Reconstruction administration because he knew too much about old military infrastructure to be ignored. He hated the irony. Then human crews began leaving. At first, Uvik assumed it was rotation. Then entire bases closed. Each closure followed a readiness review. Tirassi operators had to demonstrate they could maintain the transferred systems, emergency spares had to exist locally, and joint teams signed off on failure drills before the human crews packed anything critical. The withdrawal was as procedural as the arrival. Humanity had not rebuilt Tirassa merely to prove it could leave. It had rebuilt the institutions required for leaving to be safe. Temporary occupation centers transferred authority to Tirassi institutions. Human personnel packed equipment. A hospital carrier that had treated 500,000 Tirassi departed for another system. Uvik went to the spaceport. Penelope stood beside him. "You're leaving." "Yes." "How many troops remain?" "Treaty monitoring force, joint security." "Nothing more." "What about the eastern atmospheric platforms?" "Tirassi control." "The orbital foundries?" "Transferred." "The recovery authority?" "Joint board for 6 more years, then yours." Uvik looked at her. "You are actually leaving." "That was the agreement." He almost accused her of lying again, then realized she had never lied. "What if we rebuild the military?" "Then we respond." "What if a new government rejects the treaty?" "Then we deal with that government." "What if Tirassa hates you forever?" Penelope shrugged. "That's your decision." Uvik looked toward the restored sky. Humanity had held his planet completely. Then, piece by piece, it had handed it back. For the first time, he believed the answer Ashcroft had given at the surrender table. Nothing beyond the treaty itself was demanded in repayment for the reconstruction. That did not make Tirassa's sense of obligation disappear. It made it impossible to escape. Chapter 10. The Ones Who Fixed the Sky. 21 years after surrender, Uvik attended a political rally he was not invited to. The Dominion Restoration Front had grown powerful enough to worry him. Its leaders promised dignity, military independence, cultural purification, an end to human moral occupation, even though most human forces had left Tirassa years earlier. Uvik sat near the back in civilian clothing. A speaker displayed wartime imagery. The rally showed human battleships burning Tirassi defense stations and cities struck during the final campaign. All real. Then came the old slogans. Humans could never be trusted. Humanity sought to erase Tirassi identity. Operation Second Dawn had been a humiliation disguised as mercy. The crowd reacted, mostly older citizens. Uvik understood them. He had once felt the same. Then the speaker said, "Humanity has always been our ancestral enemy." A young Tirassi near Uvik raised a hand. The speaker frowned. "Yes." The young man looked genuinely confused. "The ones who fixed the sky." The room went quiet. Someone laughed. Then several people did. The speaker tried to recover. Uvik stopped listening. The young Tirassi could not remember the war. He remembered atmospheric schools named after Reconstruction engineers, joint hospitals, human exchange students, trade routes, stories from grandparents who survived the winter because human grain ships arrived. That was the political consequence humanity had paid for. Not obedience, memory, different memory. The Restoration Front survived. It even won seats, but it never restored the Dominion. Too many Tirassi had grown up with something more useful than hatred. They did not grow up pro-human by default. They argued about trade, treaty limits, cultural influence, and the fairness of the occupation years. What the Restoration Front could no longer do was reduce humanity to a single inherited enemy image without colliding with lived family history. The Reconstruction had not purchased loyalty. It had made propaganda compete with memory. Chapter 11. The New Threat. The Braxian ascendancy waited until humanity was overextended. That was intelligent. Human fleets were fighting piracy across 2 frontier sectors. Several coalition members were engaged in a separate border crisis. Tirassa's military had rebuilt only within treaty limits. Anti-human political factions remained visible. The human-Tirassi relationship had never been tested by a new war. The Bractions concluded that Tirassa would stay neutral. They might even have expected sympathy. Uvik could not fault the logic. He might have reached the same conclusion decades earlier. The first Braction attack struck 3 human frontier systems. The first attack struck military depots and transit infrastructure before civilian settlements became caught in the expansion. Human fleets mobilized. Tirassi intelligence requested guidance from Earth. The answer arrived quickly. Humanity asked for transit access through Tirassi space for medical and evacuation traffic. Nothing more. There was no fleet request, alliance activation, or reminder of Operation Second Dawn. Uvik, now a senior defense minister, brought the message before the Tirassi Council. A minister read it twice. That is all. Yes. They are not requesting military support. No. Another councillor frowned. They saved us. Uvik said nothing. Why haven't they called the debt? The phrase moved through the room. The debt. Everyone understood. Uvik looked at the human request. Humanity requested humanitarian transit. That was all, he finally answered, because they never considered it theirs to call. The debate lasted 9 hours. Defense planners presented fuel requirements, expected casualties, treaty limits, and the risk of leaving the Bractions unopposed near Tirassi trade corridors. Economists modeled sanctions and mobilization costs. No one was permitted to reduce the decision to gratitude alone. If Tirassa entered the war, it would do so because memory, interest, law, and identity now pointed in the same direction. Some ministers argued neutrality. Others warned that the Bractions would eventually threaten Tirassa. Several insisted that legal obligation did not exist. They were correct. Then an elderly woman asked to address the chamber. Her name meant nothing to Uvik until he saw the historical note. She had been 11 during the first post-war winter. Her district survived because human transports delivered food after local agriculture failed. She walked slowly to the speaking platform. They had our world in their hands, she said. No one interrupted. They gave it back. Then she sat down. The Tirassi Council voted. The vote was not unanimous, but it was enough. For the first time since the surrender, Tirassi warships mobilized beside humanity. Humanity had never asked them to mobilize. Chapter 12. The Fleet Between. The human evacuation convoy at Edris Crossing was not supposed to become a battlefield. 28 civilian transports, 4 escort frigates, thousands of families evacuating before the Braction advance. The human fleet expected to cover them. The Bractions arrived first. Uvik watched the situation unfold from the command deck of the Tirassi defense cruiser Dauntless Memory. He was too old to command a fleet directly. Everyone had told him so. He had boarded anyway. The Braction formation outnumbered the human escorts 3-1. The civilian transports were too slow to run. The human frigates formed a defensive wall. Uvik saw one take a direct hit. Its shields collapsed. A Braction commander opened a broad channel. To the Tirassi vessels entering this region, this conflict does not concern you. Withdraw and your neutrality will be respected. The Tirassi captain looked toward Uvik. He nodded once. The captain answered. Those transports are under Tirassi protection. The Braction commander sounded genuinely surprised. You would enter a human war. The Tirassi captain's mandibles tightened. It became hours before I was born. Uvik closed his eyes briefly. Then the Tirassi fleet accelerated. The Tirassi ships carried the same hull lines, weapon architecture, and military tradition that had once terrified human colonies. Now those ships moved between human families and enemy fire. Braction missiles struck Tirassi shields. Tirassi batteries answered. The first exchange was violent. The human escorts immediately recognized the opening. They shifted formation around the civilian convoy. Tirassi cruisers took the exposed flank. A Braction destroyer tried to cut across the evacuation vector. 2 Tirassi ships intercepted it. Uvik felt the deck shudder as the Dauntless Memory fired. The Bractions had expected political hesitation. Instead, they found doctrine. The Tirassi had spent 2 decades rewriting that doctrine for defensive war. Their ships still favored aggressive interception, concentrated fire, and hard counterthrusts, but the objective had changed. They no longer measured success by territory seized. At Edris Crossing, success meant every civilian transport reaching the jump boundary. Tirassi defense doctrine had always been aggressive. Humanity had never asked them to abandon that, only to stop using it for conquest. Now the old instincts served a different purpose. Their objective was simple: protect the transports, hold the line, and buy time. Uvik watched a human civilian ship pass behind them. Its hull was painted with children's drawings near one viewport section. He wondered whether anyone aboard knew his name. Probably not, and Uvik preferred it that way. Debts that required witnesses were weaker things. Human reinforcements arrived 43 minutes later. The Braxian formation withdrew. The convoy escaped. Tirassi casualties were heavy. Uvik stood in the damaged command center and listened to reports. One young officer looked toward the retreating Braxians. Was it worth it? Uvik looked at the human transports disappearing into safe transit. Yes. He did not explain. He did not need to. Chapter 13. What Trillions Bought. After the Braxian War ended, economists returned to Operation Second Dawn. Uvik found that amusing. The numbers had always been obscene. The cost included terraforming engines, medical relief, food, power, atmospheric restoration, orbital construction, infrastructure replacement, and decades of subsidies. Human critics had once called it the most expensive act of mercy in history. Now strategic analysts tried to calculate what Tirassi intervention had been worth. Analysts counted ships saved, colonies preserved, trade routes defended, and human military losses avoided. One human report contained an annotation at the bottom. Tirassi Alliance contribution incalculable. Uvik laughed, then deleted the copy. The number did not matter. Operation Second Dawn had never been an investment contract, and the Edris defense was not a dividend payment. Trying to price one against the other missed the mechanism entirely. Humanity had created the conditions in which Tirassa could survive, govern itself, and someday choose what kind of neighbor it wanted to be. The later alliance was valuable precisely because it remained a choice. He visited the old restoration ring in orbit above Tirassa. Once, humans had used it to repair the planetary magnetic network. Now it served as a joint shipyard. Human cargo vessels shared traffic lanes with Tirassi transports. Below, Tirassa was alive. Cities glowed across the night side. Agricultural belts stretched beneath restored climate systems. The oceans had stabilized. The same world the galaxy once expected humanity to finish had become one of the reasons human civilians survived a later war. Uvik stood at the viewport for a long time. Then he requested a meeting with Penelope Ashcroft. She was still alive, barely, according to human medical standards. He wanted to settle something before either of them died. Chapter 14. No balance. Penelope walked with a cane. Uvik considered this satisfying. He did too. They met in a quiet observation chamber on Luna, far from Tirassa and farther from the battlefields where they had first learned one another's names. Penelope looked at him. You got old. Uvik clicked his mandibles. So did you. Rude. You started it. She smiled. For several minutes they watched Earth turn below. Then Uvik spoke. Tirassa entered the Braxian War. I noticed. We lost 31 major vessels. I know. We saved human transports. Yes. We later provided reconstruction assistance after the Altair storms. Yes. Tirassi engineers rebuilt 2 coalition transit stations. Yes. We opened our frontier markets. Penelope looked at him. Uvik. He continued. We have protected human colonies, shared technology, fought beside your fleets. I know. He felt irritation rising. Is it paid? Penelope frowned. What? The debt? What debt? Uvik stared. The unpayable life. Recognition appeared. Oh. Oh. I haven't thought about that in years. Uvik was genuinely offended. You spent trillions rebuilding my planet. Yes. You fed our cities. Yes. You restored the sky. Yes. You saved billions. Yes. And you did not think about whether we repaid you. No. Uvik opened his mouth, then closed it. Penelope leaned back. You kept your people alive. You built something better than the Dominion. You showed up when our civilians needed help. Sounds like you had plenty to do. That does not answer the question. It does to me. Uvik stared out at Earth. For decades, Tirassa had been trying to balance a ledger humanity never kept. The debt existed because Tirassa remembered, not because Earth demanded. That was why no treaty revision could cancel it, why no political leader could simply declare it void, why the young Tirassi captain at Edris Crossing had known what to do without a human request. Penelope tapped her cane against the floor. You're thinking too loudly. Uvik looked at her. Is that a human expression? No, I made it up. You remain irritating. So I've been told. He almost laughed. Then he did. Uvik's cultural debt was not paid in any clean arithmetic. From Penelope's side, there had never been a debt to collect. Both things were somehow true. Uvik decided Tirassi philosophy could suffer with the contradiction after he was gone. Chapter 15. Second Dawn. Uvik returned to Tirassa one last time. The capital had changed. Some war ruins remained as memorials. Others had been demolished. New buildings stood where command bunkers once operated. The first human field hospital had become a joint medical university. A generation of physicians trained there who had never known Tirassa without peace. Uvik walked slowly through the central plaza. Children played near a sculpture built from pieces of one of the original atmospheric processors. He found the object ugly. Humans loved memorial machinery. A plaque described Operation Second Dawn. The plaque offered no speeches or moral lessons, only dates, systems restored, lives treated, and cities supplied. Uvik appreciated that. Across the plaza, a human family asked a Tirassi vendor for directions. The vendor answered in accented English. One child laughed. Another species crossed between them. Nobody noticed the symbolism. That ordinariness pleased Uvik most. The greatest changes eventually became ordinary. That ordinariness was the part the Dominion would never have understood. Conquest demanded visible proof of power, banners, garrisons, monuments, tribute. Reconstruction succeeded when people stopped noticing who had installed the water pumps, trained the first technicians, or supplied the temporary generators. Humanity's most durable victory on Tirassa was infrastructure that no longer looked human. He looked toward the sky. When he was young, the Dominion had taught him that survival required dominance. Subordinate threats before they grew. The old Dominion doctrine had been to strike first and control neighbors. Humanity had defeated that doctrine, then refused the expected revenge. That refusal had done more damage to the old Dominion than bombardment ever could. It had left Tirassa alive long enough to become something else. Uvik stood beneath the restored sky until his legs hurt. Then he went home. Epilogue. The hospital. Decades later, a human child broke an arm in a transit accident on Tirassa. The injury was minor. The hospital was not. It occupied an entire city block. Its oldest wing had begun as a temporary human field hospital during Operation Second Dawn. The attending Tirassi physician examined the child's arm while the girl's parents hovered nearby. A medical student followed. The student was young enough that the war existed only in historical simulations. As they left the treatment room, she looked toward the entrance. Two scripts were carved above the doors. The two scripts were Tirassi and human. "Why both?" she asked. The physician glanced up. This building was founded by human medical teams after the Dominion surrendered. The student considered that. Was this where they made the treaty? The physician shook her head. No. She looked down the corridor. Human patients, Tirassi patients. A Braxian exchange student arguing with a receptionist. A nurse carrying medication. A child laughing because his cast had been painted blue. The physician smiled. This is where they made it matter.